there was another billion in President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill Act, which talks about investment in offensive cyber operations as well. And I think we just kind of need to see how that kind of plays out in practice. But at the moment, the rhetoric does seem to be ramping up in terms of, governments moving to a war footing, this kind of level of distrust on the geopolitical landscape, and needing to develop their own kind of core cyber capabilities. And so, yeah, that's going to be a really, really interesting thing to kind of observe over the next 12 months or so, how that plays out. And also how it impacts us all, right? Because, what would that mean if we do see a real kind of ramping up of activity beyond the kind of sanctions that we've seen in the last couple of years, but ramping up of activity in terms of things like law enforcement takedowns, and working with the private sector to develop offensive cyber capabilities. If we are seeing an uptick of sort of Western liberal democracies doing that, what does that mean for the overall threat landscape? What does it mean for the private sector if they are asked to be playing a more active role within those? And how do we make sure that we do set the right kind of safeguards and legal and ethical frameworks around that? So yeah, I'm really absolutely fascinated to see how this one does play out over the next 12 months or so.
Yeah, it's like playing 4D chess almost, right? Like there's so much that goes into it, even just from, like from a capabilities perspective. But you look at the capabilities that America probably has and that Russia and China probably have. I mean, it's the equivalent of digital nukes. If you could shut down the water supply of a country, that's potentially just as devastating as a nuke going off, right? I mean, it really is that significant. Or shutting down the power grid. Like those are massive things that could happen that would not just like disrupt people's lives, it would change people's lives forever. It might kill more people than nukes. It may take longer, but it may actually kill more. And I was talking to a cyber warfare officer for the NSA. And this was a couple of years ago. The episode actually never even went live because I was told very, very firmly not to let it go live. And so I was very keen on not having, the FBI come knocking on my door. It's not a very good look in my neighborhood. And, I asked him, was there ever, like a target package that you were given that you couldn't find a way to, complete the mission, right? Whether it's like tracking them or monitoring them or developing a package, a exploit package, whatever it might be. And he said, no, there's never been a single one. I've done over 200 of these. There's never been a single one that I couldn't figure out how to hack in some way. It doesn't matter what the country was. Doesn't matter if they were in China behind the China's Great Firewall, right? He said the biggest problem for his side is actually getting someone to like pull the metaphorical trigger by the time the exploit is actually found, discovered, weaponized, to have someone actually hit enter on their keyboard and launch it before it is patched or whatever it is. He told me, he's like, sometimes like I'll go into the vault and find an iPhone 0 day that isn't out yet, no one knows about it, and I'll build it into this exploit, and it's like, okay, well, it's on a timetable. Like if this gets taken out, 90% of my attack doesn't even work, right? And he said most of the time, these 0 days are being found out in time and being patched and whatnot. And it's an interesting delay because in the article that I was skimming through it, admittedly I was skimming through it, I'm sorry, I did not read the entire thing.
There's still time.
Yeah, right. But it was talking about how the policy is shifting towards taking a more offensive
Mm.
approach in cyberspace, cyber warfare, whatever it is, right? Maybe cyber warfare is too strong of a term for the report, right? But when I hear that, it makes me nervous as someone that, so I'm not a hacker, but I'm like as close to being a hacker without being a hacker as you possibly can be, where like I know how to do basically all of it, I just don't do it. And so like I can't call myself a hacker, right? But just seeing the capabilities and then knowing the people in the space that actually do it and the capabilities that they have, it's like we're going on the offensive, okay, but we're not even ready on the defense side to like defend a counter offensive. Like we're not even close. So it makes me nervous.
No, it's a really interesting point, and I mean, maybe there is some light in that. So the kind of the recent announcement around NATO spending kind of ramping up to 5% and 1.5% of that being in kind of non-traditional defense spending. And I think that governments are looking at how they spend some of that money from a cyber resilience perspective. And there has been some decent progress, a lot of it actually driven by regulations around critical infrastructure resilience and resilience of financial institutions and that sort of thing. But I think, we still got, as you kind of point to, still got massive gaps that need sorting. And one of the areas that we're constantly seeing is, and there's a bit of a perennial question mark about how we tackle it, is when we're looking at small to medium sized businesses and enterprises. They how do we kind of uplift the resilience of those organizations when they don't have the same resources, they don't have the same skills or access to skills as larger organizations. But ultimately, those sorts of organizations make up a significant percentage of the global economy and the economy of kind of domestic economy, the US, UK, Europe, Australia, and also often form part of the supply chain into these kind of critical infrastructure organizations. So there is a bit of a question mark about how we tackle that at the moment and how we ensure that yes, we need to kind of continue with the efforts of recent years to kind of uplift critical infrastructure resilience, and regulators and national authorities doing you know good job of working with those sorts of organizations to address some of that. But what's the kind of broader plan for the supply chain and those smaller organizations, or those organizations that might just kind of fit outside of critical infrastructure and so therefore not necessarily subject to the same standards and regulations? So yeah, big question mark about how governments tackle that. And some of it will require government to put some kind of money behind it in terms of providing some more proactive support. Other parts of it is probably around making sure that the technology that all of those sorts of businesses are relying on is secure by design and secure by default where possible. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a head scratcher at the moment for a lot of policymakers. Hopefully I wasn't too harsh earlier when I was saying how slow governments move, but actually do have some level of sympathy for them, because a lot of these challenges and stuff that they're dealing with, there aren't easy silver bullet solutions. And also there's question marks about the extent to which how much government needs to be responsible versus businesses, and yeah, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like 100 questions that, still need to be answered with it, right? Something that I have found to be pretty interesting is there's a few states in America that are spinning up, like, the Texas Cyber Command, right? And there's a couple other states that are doing it too, where they're basically just, enlisting cybersecurity experts into the reserves and then putting them on Cyber Command to help in the event that a massive cyber attack actually happens, which I actually think is a really good idea. That's probably the only way that you can do it at this point, because you have to think about it, right? What's the age range for someone entering, the National Guard or military just overall, right? It's you're young, early 20s, right? Like when I was in my early 20s, I was trying to enlist as